All right, let's dive right in. Today, we're talking about a strategy that completely flips the script on how we think about winning. It's not about who has the most muscle. It's about who's smart enough to find the weak spot. This is the art of attacking weakness. You know the feeling, right? In your job, in some project, maybe even in a rivalry you've got going on. You're just pushing and pushing against this massive obstacle, a competitor who seems unbeatable, a problem that just will not break. And you're getting tired, you're going nowhere, and honestly, it feels like you're just making the wall stronger by slamming into it. But what if you've been fighting the wrong fight this whole time?
So our first instinct is always to meet strength with more strength. They build a giant wall, we think, okay, I need a bigger ladder. But that's a battle of pure exhaustion. It costs a ton, it's draining, and honestly, winning is a 50-50 shot at best. The real path to victory, the real secret, is to just stop playing their game. Refuse to fight strength with strength. Instead, you find their weakness and you change the entire battlefield.
Now, the key to this whole thing comes from this really cool ancient idea. It basically says the world is made of two things: shi, which is solid stuff, the substance, and shu, which is empty space. The real genius is learning to see the difference between your opponent's solid, fortified wall and the wide open, empty space right next to it. So, shi is where your opponent is strong. You know, their best products, their toughest defenses, all the places they expect you to attack. But Tzu, that's the emptiness. Their weaknesses, their blind spots, all the stuff they've ignored or forgotten about. The whole strategy is ridiculously simple when you think about it. You just flow around the solid parts and pour everything you've got right into the empty parts.
Okay, so how do we actually do this? The first tactic is all about seizing control. It's about making your opponent so busy, so distracted, that they end up creating their own weak spots for you.
There's some beautifully brutal math to this. Look, if you can force your opponent to defend 10 different places at once, just because they have no idea where you're gonna hit, you can then focus all of your strength on just one of those spots. You keep your plan a secret, which forces them to show their hand. They get scattered and weak. You stay focused and sharp. This is the goal, right here. You want to create this massive, localized advantage. By creating a little chaos and making them guess, you can basically engineer a situation where you've got a 10-to-1 advantage. While they have 1 unit of power spread thin across the map, you show up with 10 units of focused power. Victory at that one point, it's pretty much a sure thing. Let's look at a real-world story. Imagine an activist group wants to protest a major government building. Instead of just marching up to the front door, they announce 10 different protests all over the city, all at the same time. Now the authorities have to scramble. They have to spread their security forces thin to cover every single spot. And boom, that creates the exact weakness the activists were looking for. Their main group can now hit their primary target, which is only being guarded by a tiny fraction of the total security force. They literally created the weakness they planned to attack.
So you can make your opponent weak by spreading them out. But what if the weakness is already there, just hiding in plain sight? This brings us to the next tactic. This isn't about making them weak. It's about finding where they aren't even looking. It's about attacking the void. I mean, it sounds so simple, right? Almost too obvious. But think about how often we totally ignore this. We try to storm the fortress head on instead of just, finding the undefended supply line in the back. The real masters of strategy don't just win battles. A lot of the time they avoid them completely, but just moving through these unguarded spaces and getting what they want without a fight.
Let's talk about one of the greatest business takedowns in history. Back in the day, Nokia was the absolute king of cell phones. Their strength, their full wall, was their hardware. You could drop those things off a building, the battery lasted a week, they were unbeatable at that game. But their empty space, their big weakness, clunky software, and a user experience that was just awful. So what did Apple do? They didn't try to build a tougher phone with a longer battery life. No way. They completely ignored Nokia's strengths and attacked the void. They launched the iPhone, which was all about the software experience. They hid Nokia where it wasn't even defending. And by doing that, they made Nokia's greatest strengths totally irrelevant. So how do you find these voids in your world? Well, it's not just guesswork. It's more like being a detective. First, you analyze. You figure out what your opponent really cares about. Then, you provoke them. You make a small move, like float a rumor, launch a tiny test,
just to see how they react. Their overreaction tells you everything you need to know. And finally, you test their defenses with little probes here and there. It's a systematic way to map out their entire fortress and find all the unlocked doors. All of these ideas, making them spread out, attacking the void, they're all tied together by one really elegant philosophy. To really master this art, you have to become completely formless. This right here is the master metaphor. Just think about it for a second. Water never slams itself against a mountain, right? It just flows around it. It always finds the lowest point, the path of least resistance. It doesn't have a rigid plan. Its plan is to adapt. In strategy, the high ground is your opponent's strength. The low ground is their weakness. Your strategy should be to just be like water. Flow away from their strengths and rush right into their weaknesses. And when you can do this, you reach the highest level of mastery. Ancient strategists had a word for it, Shen, which basically means spirit-like genius. It's when you have no fixed form. You're not the aggressive one or the defensive one. You are whatever the situation needs you to be, adapting on the fly to exploit the shape of your enemy and flow into their empty spaces.
I mean, just look at Netflix. Blockbuster's high ground was its thousands of stores. That was an untouchable strength. So Netflix didn't build stores. It flowed right into the low ground, that empty space of mailing DVDs, a business Blockbuster thought was a joke. But then, just like water, Netflix adapted again. When the landscape changed, it sensed a new low ground, digital streaming, and it rushed to fill that void, leaving its own old strategy behind and leaving Blockbuster stranded on its now useless high ground.
That's the whole idea right there. Be adaptable, be relentless, and always be seeking the path of least resistance to your goal. So as we wrap up, I want to leave you with this question to chew on. In your own life, in your own challenges, what is the solid brick wall that you keep running into head first? And if you just stopped for a second and you looked around, where's the empty space? Where's the ignored path? Where's the unguarded door that's just waiting for you to calmly walk through it?